Hello and welcome to Dixon Cox, where we take a light-hearted look at the week's news with me, Nick Dixon, and Paul Cox, the
Hello.
star of GB News. How you doing, Paul?
I'm good, thanks, Nick. Yeah, all good. All good. The reason I'm laughing, and we're not talking about this now, is because I just said I'm all good after a 30-minute conversation with Nick about probably why I'm not all good. So it's just like went straight. For those who watch Dixon Cox Go Mental, and you should do, by the way, it's a fantastic addition to your podcast listening. Um, it's all part of performative Paul. But for the purpose of this conversation where it doesn't really matter, Nick. I'm doing good, thanks, mate. How are you?
I'm great, Paul, but yeah, I mean, actually, I am all right. But you're right. So on nickdixon.net, you can get the full version of this podcast, which is Dixon Cox, which is a political show. But we also now do Dixon Cox Go Mental, where we go into far more esoteric subjects, and that's where, and it's good because it separates the personal stuff from people who really don't want to hear that, and they don't want to hear the political stuff. So you can go to nickdixon.net. I'm actually going to have some big guests on that soon, weirdly. We didn't even think it was going to have guests, but we've got some exciting guests coming up
I
for
love
that
it.
show. And yeah, so I'm doing well, Paul. I saw a comment just before we started recording on the YouTube. Nick, you need to let the women in. Otherwise, it's a cold, lonely future for you. And honest to God, there are a zillion good women out there. It's like I was in a good mood, and it's like, you're going to be cold and lonely, Nick. I know you're in a
Yeah.
good mood today, but you won't be soon, mate. It's like, thanks for that random person on YouTube. That's a good one for Dixon Cox Go Mental, but we won't get into it here because here's about hard hitting politics, hard news, very hard news from
Stop saying
frontline.
hard.
Hard, stop. Yeah, that's for Dixon. Well, it is Dixon Cox, Paul. You saying you don't
Dixon
want
Cox
hard
go
Dixon
hard.
Cox? Is that why? Oh, Dixon Cox go hard. There's gonna be so many spin-offs. Well, I don't know what that show would be. That's just
Just
sort of a even more edgy show. Dixon Cox go hard. That's the show where we get racist. I don't know what could even more racist.
yeah.
To clarify,
Even more even more racist with Dixon Cox.
yeah.
Behind the
Um,
paywall.
yes. Anyway, thanks for all your support for the podcast. Many love it, some don't. Can't please everyone. But this week, we're going to tackle the German election. We're going to tackle a bit of the Ukraine stuff, and then we'll do peak woke because there's been some shocking stories this week. And we might do Ed Davey Watch, which is just a ridiculously niche section, but people seem to like it. So, Paul, I thought we'd start with this German election. Obviously, a big deal. Now, none of us are going to claim to be experts, but I've been doing some research on it. I mean, the seats breakdown was the CDU, who are kind of like the sort of Tory wets, I guess. They got 208 seats. The AFD, who, of course, the right wing, and we'll discuss are they far right or are they not? I mean, they have a lesbian leader, not typically a feature of far right parties, but of course, they're called far right by sections of the media. They got 152 seats. SPD, Scholz's lot, took a beating, went down to 120 seats. Grüne, I don't know how you do these.
I
Sorry about
love
the
it. I
pronunciation,
love a faux
but
German
Kru,
and when you don't know how to pronounce it, just add a
yeah,
bit of German accent.
Krone, yeah, that's the
Gruna?
Green Party. Uh,
That's what it
85
stands for,
seats.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Gruna, is that
Green.
not
That
green?
was just the
Yeah.
word Green. Yeah,
Yeah.
85 seats. Die Linke, which just
Oh
means
yeah.
the left. I love the literalism of the Germans. The left, ultra
Green.
far left party. They got 64 seats. They come from like the Leninist party. They're like
Yeah.
descended from Lenin. Like, do you like Lenin? You'll love Die Linke. Are
Make
you a
Owen
young
Jones look
woman
based.
who's clueless? You'll love Leninism. Um, anyway, and then some other parties who got basically nothing. So that was the breakdown. And so where to start? There's so much we could say.
Oh,
So some are showing that some are sort of claiming, oh, this shows that the right don't really get anywhere, even with Musk. But that's a fairly desperate claim because many people are saying actually they've done better than ever. Although some are saying, well, they're not actually far right. If you read the Independent, they're far right. If you read the Telegraph, they're not. And Mertz, he's basically looks like he's going to be chancellor. He's of the CDU, sorry, and they reckon about 850,000 CDU voters defected to the AFD, which is interesting, pushing them to over 20% of the total vote. We can get into the graphs later, but women voted for the left party, which is in insane numbers, young women particularly. Although, and young men voted for the AFD, so that was interesting. Although young women also voted for the AFD to some degree. I'm just going to looking for the stats on that here because that's quite an interesting breakdown. Gay people also voted for AFD, who, like I say, have a lesbian leader, so it's not that surprising. But it also leads one to question whether they're really so far right. So Frauen, Paul, the Frauen got 30 with 18 to
Frau, isn't that
24.
Mrs. Mum or
No, no, but
female or
Frauen
someone?
is women, but Frau
Ah, yeah,
something
yeah,
is
yeah.
Mrs.
So we got green, left, woman.
Grune, Frauen. Yeah, I know. Germany's one of those languages that we have to like bring up a bit of snot to say it properly. There's so many like snot language. It's like, guys, just be a non-snot language like English, because you have to go like
Well, English
Frau.
doesn't.
You have to, huh?
Isn't English? Isn't German a parent language of English in some way? Are
Yeah,
we
we
not
got rid of that
derived?
Frauen. We got rid of that weird noise you have to make at the start. It's like all those Spanish languages. We have to be like perro. It's like, why are you doing these things with your mouth? Just do normal stuff with your mouth, and you can speak English.
Is it
Almost
them that are
like
wrong
you
or
know, like
us,
how
Nick?
Arabic is like Khaldun. It's like we don't. Why are you making that noise? Like, obviously, I respect all these cultures. They've all
What do
been
we
great
say that noise
cultures.
for? Young women spitting on dicks and
Yeah,
cocks.
we use it for spitting. But, like, don't use it in everyday words. It's just obvious, isn't it? It's just obvious. Anyway,
It is to us,
um,
Nick.
the Frauen got 34 amongst the 18 to 24-year-old demographic. It was like 34. Presumably that's percent were voting for Die Linke, and then only 15 on the
Linker.
men's side. AFD 25 for the men, 14 for women. So there was AFD was still the second biggest party among young women, actually, which people don't talk about. But the left party just is just off the charts. This graph, and you're going. So you've got this big divide people are talking about between the men voting so-called far right and women voting actually far left. So you go, okay, something's gone very wrong there. I don't know where to start, Paul. There's so much. I mean, has your take been that the AFD are not really far out, or do you think they actually are?
I made a video for my YouTube channel which doubled in size last week. Much thanks to Bev Turner sharing a video, which I don't need to advertise here, but feel free to go to
Dixon
my
Cox
YouTube channel.
doubling in size. Sorry,
By the way, a double is from 750 subscribers to 1,500. But
wait,
from
double your
small acorns.
subscribers, not the view count.
Although the video's got 50,000 views, which is probably my biggest, but
Sweet.
that's not the video I'm talking about. The video I'm talking about is a video called "Does Germany Need an Alternative?" And essentially, it was the election, pre-election, because I didn't know what the outcome was at that point, against the backdrop of the Islamic terrorism pandemic that is occurring in Germany. 4 deadly attacks since December alone, just in Germany, where toddlers have been stabbed, families have been rammed into, demonstrators have been rammed into. Demonstrators, by the way, that were demonstrating for the right of immigrants were ploughed into by a failed immigrant who happened to be an Islamist, obviously, which is the sort of rather dangerous sect of the Muslim faith that like to kill people in the name of their peace-loving religion. So the AFD wouldn't necessarily have been considered alt-right, far-right, hard-right up until, really, I believe, the immigration debate within Germany. And just so happened that the latest stabbing, which was at the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin last Friday, as we record, was from a Syrian refugee, a young man. Luckily, the person he stabbed, which was a Spanish tourist, doesn't seem to have passed away and seems to just be in hospital critically injured. So Godspeed with that recovery. But Syria and Syrians are very important as part of this debate with the ADF because in 2015,
AFD.
2016, sorry?
No, you just said ADF, and I felt I've got to correct it, or someone's gonna
Oh,
just say
yes, AFD, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that came from, but thanks, Nick. And so because the debate really kicked off because in 2016, 2017, 1 million Syrian passport holders came to Germany as a result of Angela Merkel's open border policy. She said anyone who's fleeing Syria or anywhere else in that part of the world, for what it's worth, can happily come to Germany and reside there and will manage. Well, they haven't managed. It's now the best part of 10 years later, and there is a terrorism epidemic because they're just not assimilated. So the argument started that obviously now uh, Assad has fled to Moscow and the war is over in Syria. If they were here to protect themselves from that war, could they go back? That's what that was the seminal argument that kicked off this immigration stuff. That and the fact that people were getting knifed to death in the street, rammed by cars, etc., etc. So the ADF came very hard on this. and said that if we get into power, and we'll get to that in a sec, if we get into power, we will make sure that can never happen by sending them all back, stopping all immigration, doing a Doge, doing doing essentially what Musk and Trump are doing in America. And they fought a battle on that, and they doubled their seats. So to say that they've achieved nothing is demonstrably untrue. They've achieved double their seats. Now, historically, of course, because of what happened in the 30s and 40s in Germany, anyone on the right of politics has been a pariah, been ostracized. And of course, they always create coalitions in Germany for whatever reason. They can't quite form a majority with anybody. But nobody has ever created a coalition since World War II with a right wing party. What was potentially going to happen this time and hasn't happened is that they would have to, because the AfD would have such a strong minority that they'd have no choice to. Now, the argument still is they're going to be able to form a coalition between the CDU and the SDP, I think it is. They're going to be able to form a coalition there. But of course, with so many seats and plus 20% of the vote, the ADF or the AfD, I don't know why I keep saying that now. The AfD have have a form of mandate from the public within Germany. There is a groundswell of opinion that people don't want this anymore. By this, I mean this perpetual terrorism from outsiders. So, like JD Vance said just a couple of weeks ago, the problem is within. And the problem within Germany is definitely within. There's less to fix out than there is in. And I'm not sure now with this new coalition we're going to see any different than from the coalition that was dissolved in November 2024. So what we end up sadly knowing is that there's likely to be more unprevented innocent deaths, Nick.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right to call out Merkel, which I did on GB News. Shocking stuff. It was like the Boris wave, but arguably worse. It was just like, yeah, we'll take in endless Syrians. And it's all, of course, based on the lie, the sort of naive notion that people are all the same and cultures are the same. It'll be fine to just bring in millions of Syrians into Germany. No, it won't, because they're now killing people. So are people from Afghanistan. And as you say, the AfD has been very tough on this and just said no, they have to go back because the conflicts are over. And then the BBC were grilling this representative of AfD on a recent clip saying, "What about the treatment of women in Afghanistan?" She's like, "Well, it's a normal Islamic country," and so it might sound harsh, but the fact is, it is harsh the way they treat women. But Germany can't deal with the world's problems. Loads of countries are messed up. Doesn't mean they can all live in Germany. It's just kind of obvious stuff, but it makes you sound like people say like, "What about how women are treated?" It's like, well, you're going to keep every woman from Afghanistan in Germany.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it's entirely like, okay, so governments are elected by people to protect their interests. Okay, so when elected governments take decisions that demonstrably harm their public, you have to question A, their intelligence, and B, their motives. So, governments all across the West have made decisions in the name of, and mistakenly in the name of diversity, multiculturalism, all against this thinly veiled. We must build our economy on cheap labour, so therefore we've got to flood our country with anybody. When they do so and they mix cultures in the way they have, to the extent that they have, with the cultures that they have, and those people are now killing people that were resident in that country legally and abiding by the laws of that country, you have to hold these governments accountable. There's no two ways about it. So it becomes very much turkeys voting for Christmas, and people won't see change, and for good reason. There is a history, in our not too distant history of the right wing causing endless amounts of problems. So the whole Nazi problem still hangs over us even today, which is now essentially 100 years since that was born. Still very much hangs over us. So it's very easy for anybody on the left to say anybody on the right, no matter how good their intentions are, it ends up looking like this: the Nazis.
Yeah,
If you mirror that and say, well, you end up on the other side with communism, and by the way, have a little look at Mao. I advise anybody, and they're probably not on this channel, but if you happen to be looking at this for malevolent reasons and you want to attack Nick and I, do me a favour. Before you do, Watch a 30-minute YouTube video on what Mao did to his people. You'll very
Yes.
quickly change your mind on communism. Anyway, sorry, Nick, I went on my hobby
Especially if you
horse.
find out what his hygiene was like as well. Horrific teeth and gums, um, while killing millions. So yeah, that was just an Alan Partridge moment. I did that on purpose, and of course he killed
I
millions
wasn't aware.
anyway. Yes, I mean this post World War II paradigm. Obviously, we're stuck in it across the West, but particularly Germany, of course.
Yeah.
And I made a joke about it. I said if the AfD has underperformed, which I don't think it really had, but those were early reports, it is probably due to the leadership. If there's one thing we know about the Germans, it's that they prefer a charismatic male leader with excellent speaking skills. And I got some German guy complaining to me, this is the reason Germany's still held back because you won't let us forget our past. So like, I didn't realize I could control German post-war politics with a single tweet, but I didn't know my own strength. But
Had you known, Nick, this would have all been sorted some time
it
ago.
could have all been sorted. I mean, as if I'm responsible for that. But the answer to that is you just have to get over it. You just have to get over it. And it's, oh yeah, but what about because of Hitler? We need infinity migrants. No, you just have to get over it. That's up to Germans to go. Nah, we've done that now. We're moving on. They're the only people that can do that. I'm not saying it's easy, but we've all had to sort of be called racist and all these things and have hit pieces written about us. We all just have to take this in the modern world. We just have to go. I had two national newspapers calling me misogynist for stuff I'd said on a podcast, trying to get rid of me off the back of Lawrence Fox. I've had Hope Not Hate write a hit piece against me saying I'm far right, and you just have to go like, all right, cheers, lads, and move on because these smears will be used. So on this, there's the firewall, isn't there? The so-called Brandmauer, which is the firewall, which is the really continued, I think, just anti-democratic, dodgy attempt to keep out the AfD. They've all said, the CDU is saying we won't work with them. As you said, they want to work with the SPD instead, who have 16.4%. CDU have 28.5%. So this will be a so-called GroKo, which is Grand Coalition, the term they use in Germany, because as you say, they don't have first past the post. So it's always a weird mix. But they've all said they won't work with the AfD. This is the thing they're obsessed with. And Merz has already in a speech said we won't be shutting the borders or whatever. He's already sort of rolling back on immigration
Mm.
on day one. But if they don't solve it, these ideas will remain. This anger will remain. You're not going to get rid of it with your firewall. The firewall can only hold for so long. It's like Helm's Deep. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, the firewall,
Yeah.
yes, it may be strong, but it can only hold for so long. Um, it's
So
gone.
I, I'd written a Substack last week as well, where I essentially summed it up by saying ultimately, because of everything you've just described, that the solution to this problem comes from the right of politics. Because the left's refusal to hold themselves account and the fact that they have failed to protect means that ultimately the solution can only come from the right of politics, and it will be quite a draconian solution. It will come in the way that Trump is coming at the political world right now, because there'll be no other way to do it. There's so many intricacies and interwinding policies across Europe within the EU. And by the way, Keir Starmer's signing us up to this shit once again, because he's signing us up to be completely aligned with net zero in the EU. Not talking to anybody about it, by the way. And as soon as you do that, you are signed up to version 1.4. Every time there's a new version of that policy, you have to go with it. So it's dragging the UK continually in one direction. And that's just on net zero. We don't know what else they're doing. And the same's happening within Germany and across Europe. They're so determined to hold together the principles that the EU was built on, which is essentially this one big community. And it's a failed project. It is a failed project. If you took France and Germany out of that project, it would immediately collapse. So you know it's failed because that would have been true before the EU was formed. So, and I don't want to undermine any of the other economies in there. I know Poland's a great country and Spain's a great country, and they've got their own problems, but they've also got their own benefits as well. But that just goes to further prove my point. All of these countries can stand alone, and we can come together. It doesn't mean that the UK isn't part of Europe, but this whole European Union experiment has led to this point. It's our
Mm.
own version of communism, and there'll be people that'll argue, well, it's only a stabbing here or only a car ramming there. They are twice a week. Just last weekend, there was one each day across Europe, France, Germany, all from the same sect of a religion, all from the same fanatical people, all fanatically against our values, our shared values in Europe. It only ends with strongman politics. I just don't see any other way, Nick.
Well, yes, they got it. Yes, as long as those things continue, which they will. So here's a bit from the Telegraph from Elizabeth Dampier. She says the SPD, Greens, and hard left Die Linke disagree with Mertz's policies on immigration and the economy. The SPD wants to hold on to universal basic income, but would agree on a lower debt ceiling. Die Linke wants more taxes, such as a wealth tax and higher inheritance tax, plus rent controls. I'm sure they do. The Greens are ideologically wedded to the net zero policies, which are causing so many problems for the economy. Leading Green politician Robert Habeck made it a non-negotiable position to phase out the combustion engine by 2035. All three parties are resistant to reducing immigration or to fixing the asylum crisis. So that's the thing. So they're now getting this coalition where CDU is going to have to hang out with these people who don't want to fix any of these problems. And why? Because, as you say, because of the post World War II idea that even a party led by a lesbian who is married to a Sri Lankan
Yeah,
woman,
she's in
uh,
a civil
it,
partnership, and they've got two adopted children. I think, or maybe surrogates. I don't know, but they've got two
because
children.
right, because that party is so far right, you can't even get together with them, even on this immigration crisis. So how? I mean, how is this possibly going to work?
So I think what's made them far right is their views on immigration. And by the way, that's a smear. It's a smear on all of us. Anybody, the same way as you're smeared when it comes to net zero. If you think any form of asylum is bad, you're far right. If you think that net zero is a costly disaster that will end essentially with cold people who can't afford to heat themselves, but huge great corporations that sell heat pumps very well off. And people like Ed Miliband smug because he's got a legacy. No, you haven't got a fucking legacy, you idiot. You're basically leading us into war with ourselves. People like Ed Miliband are the archetypal political careerists who see politics as their way of justifying their existence to the earth because they are so beyond privileged and so arrogant that they think that they a we need saving and b they're the people that need to save us. All of
Mm.
these people assume the rest of the people, particularly those that disagree with them, are stupid in some way.
Yeah, what's incredible is that Vidal, is that how you say it? The AFD leader keeps trying to form a coalition, and Merch just won't go for it. But he knows that he's got
No,
to
it's
form
never
a
going to happen.
government by Easter at the latest. But he's ruled out coalition with the AFD in the past, and I mean, presumably he'll stick with it. It's sort of like France, isn't it? It's a stitch up, basically. We had the same thing with National Rally
It's
in
it's
France.
almost impossible because of their voting system. It is worth noting that the demographic of the average alternative for Deutschland voter is largely, although it is spread out, but there is quite a large proportion of them in what would have been considered old Eastern Germany. And
That was their
I,
main voter base, but now
but
they're getting people in West Germany as well, aren't they?
well, as you pointed out, women, gay men, all these people would be we would have been told, of course, it's not true, but we would have been told that they would have voted for left leaning parties, or at least uh, the Christian Democrats, um, who are, like you say, conservative wets. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? You don't have to look. We've made safety a left and right issue. So basically, you could well be on the left of politics for nearly everything, and it would maybe take somebody you know being stabbed to death by a maniac for you to potentially change your mind. But even then, you wouldn't change your mind in case you were smeared as right wing.
Yeah, well, even some of those parents don't. We see these parents who have had
Oh,
children killed, and
please,
even they will
please
come
don't.
out and do speeches in favor of the liberal order that killed their child. It's unbelievable. I mean, and look at this comment from Schultz. Um, he said he said now we have the far right, and the fact that they got such a good election result is something we cannot accept, and I will never accept. We need to stick to what we've always said. We mustn't work with the far right. What's incredible about that though is he's saying I won't accept the election result. So he's literally making an
So
anti-democratic,
ironic.
openly anti-democratic statement, isn't he?
And they can get away with it. They can get away with it because you can't invoke Hitler. Because as soon as you invoke in Hitler, we've convinced ourselves invoking Hitler means you've lost a debate. But first things first, that's exactly what Hitler would have said, by the way. I can't be democratic. I won't be democratic. And the only way we can lead the Third Reich is with me. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what they're saying, but it is the language that they so despise. And of course, we've seen this on absolutely everything. We've seen this on identity politics, which is now collapsing. It's collapsing much thanks to Trump because he's smashing DEI all over the place. And even Ash Sarkar is on a tour to say now that ID politics may have been damaging in some way.
Yeah,
No
he was
shit,
never
Ash.
really in favor of it in some weird
Fuck off.
sophistry.
No, honestly, Ash, if you listen to this, fuck off. There's no way. I mean, she was the biggest perpetuator of this bullshit. And let's not forget, people got themselves in very serious trouble over this. Jail sentences, suicides, all sorts of nasties went on in the background because as soon as you can smear someone, and of course, what identity politics is all under the banner of racism. And as soon as someone's smeared as a racist, it can end their career. And as soon as their career's ended, it can end their marriage, their family situation, and they get to a point where there's nothing worth living for. And that's because people like Ash Sarkar were leading the debate. So I'm really sorry. Horse shit. Real horse shit. I'm glad the ID politics thing is coming to some sort of an end. And do you know what? To some degree, I'm glad that Ash Sarkar is saying that it was horse shit. But I think it's a very cynical attempt to detach herself from it and excuse herself from it. And I'm really sorry. You can't do that. That's not what you can do. You own it. You say, "I was part of the problem, and this is the way forward." But you don't
Yeah,
go on this tour. And by the way, come on
no
our
mercy.
podcast and talk about it.
I
Don't
say
go on
no
the rest is
mercy.
politics.
Yeah, I say no mercy for Ash Sarkar. I mean, even Brendan O'Neill's often quite liberal on these things. I haven't read the piece, but I've seen that he's saying, no, this is too little, too late. You don't just get to switch, as you say, after destroying lives with your views, essentially, even if not personally. You don't get to switch last minute and just say, no, that's done now. We will keep receipts. So,
She did it with
just,
Glee, by the way.
mhm.
You've only got
Oh,
to
yeah,
watch some
yeah,
of the
yeah.
evidence. She did it with Glee.
Yeah, yeah. Plus all that demographic change, we're winning, lad stuff. It's like, I think you might be mocking our people being wiped out there. We'll remember that one as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Um, so yes, just to stick with the German thing though, although it's all related, but and it's good to get a dig at Ash Sarkar. But just what about the American side? So the interesting comment from Mertz is that he said that it was clear this government is, meaning the US, is fairly indifferent to Europe's fate. Whereas Trump has got on and he has commented. He said all block caps. Looks like the Conservative Party in Germany has won the very big and highly anticipated election. Much like the USA, the people of Germany got tired of the no common sense agenda, especially on energy and immigration, that has prevailed for so many years. This is a great day for Germany and for the United States of America under leadership of a gentleman named Donald J. Trump. Congratulations to all. Many more victories to follow. Three exclamation marks. A gentleman named Donald J. How is he always so hilarious? That's so perfect. I watched the film of him, by the way, the Apprentice, last night, just to see how much of a hit job it was. It was a hit job, and it wasn't a great film because it relied on us just knowing things about Trump and then just having little digs at him. But it still was interesting to watch. But talk about that another time. Trump, a certain gentleman called Donald J. Trump. Now, is he abandoning Europe? Vance and I don't know if Trump has explicitly endorsed AFD, but definitely Musk and Vance have. So it's an interesting one. What's going to be the relationship between Europe? Well, that's a massive question. Relationship between Europe and the US going forward. We can't even tackle that on this
Well,
podcast.
we'll be discussing that very shortly, won't we? To some degree when we talk
Yes,
about
that's
Keir
true. We'll
Starmer
do
and
that, and
Trump.
we'll do that next. So Trump sort of endorsed it. So there's that. I'm just trying to cover everything else. I think one thing I just want to quickly cover is that, well, one thing is the turnout, which sort of proved how desperate people were. So in the Telegraph, they say a downcast mood hung over Germany ahead of the snap elections. And the week before, 83% of voters admitted in a survey to having a pessimistic outlook on the situation the country is in, very much like Britain. But turnouts were remarkably high. 84% of voters went out to cast their vote, up from 36.5% in 2021. One thing all voters can agree on is the desperate need for change. Well, that's extraordinary. I mean, 84% versus 36%. That's
Yeah,
like a
incredible.
massively engaged country due to crisis.
Yes, exactly. So they there was only one that there were there's many parties. We've discussed how many parties there are, but much like in the UK, there is a blob of parties that are going to give you exactly what you saw before. And essentially, they have gone with that, with a significant protest vote with the AFD, and the left parties have, let's not forget they've got a that was a reaction. I would say would be my personal opinion, would be a reaction to the AFD rather than them doing particularly well. I don't want to take anything away from them, although I just have done. But my sense of it is that's clearly a reaction from the far left to the AFD because they see them as a threat. Um, had they not done that, I'm sure their votes would have gone to the SDP or CDU or something of that nature. They probably wouldn't have gone to Alternative for Deutschland. I'm just saying it as many times as I can now because I don't
It's
know
fun
how
to
often
say.
I don't know how often we're going to say this. But that amount of seats in their parliament is significant, um, and it will, I assume, give them some say on policy or make it difficult to get certain policies through. But what is remarkable, Nick, is the rhetoric is exactly the same as it was with the previous coalition. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. We're not going to solve any problems. We're going to carry on as we are, our heads in the sand. And essentially, it's a fuck you. It is a fuck you because you've got their people being killed on a weekly basis by a situation that they have created, and they're going, we're not going to do anything to stop it.
Yes. The progressive elite is going to cling on at all costs. This is what we learned. And you can look at America for an example. 2016, the whole system tries to repel Trump, the entire media, etc. They don't think he's going to win. He wins by a freak thing they weren't expecting. So they were 99% Hillary and all that. So they got caught off guard. So they have this Trump presidency, but they managed to then stifle him with the deep state. Essentially, he makes the wrong appointments. He doesn't really know what he's doing in government. He doesn't affect that much. 2020, they out and out rig it. Are we allowed to say that on YouTube yet? Satirical content, guys. They hopefully won't notice our channel. But whether you want to say they rig it with the voting machines or whether you say COVID was just a very strange thing, far more postal votes, etc. So it was a freak election, we could say that. But you look at the numbers, you look at the graphs. Oh, Biden got this many votes in 2020, then it's back down to normal for 2024. Just in terms of voter turnout, it was a completely freak election. So they keep Trump out. 2024, they finally get Trump, and it's a full-on red eyes, activated beast mode Trump, and it's just executive orders, knows what to do. What I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is it actually took 8 years, even after Trump getting elected initially, to really have the counter elite. And now we have it. We have Silicon Valley, we have Musk, we have JD Vance, and we have a genuine counter elite. To the point where Trump is now going, you know who's going to be a deputy director of the FBI? My mate Dan Bongino, who does podcasts. Now he does have a background in the Secret Service and military or police or something, but it's just funny, like he's just sticking all his people in. Personnel is policy, this term from the Reagan administration. So this is finally Trump wising up and going, right, bang, 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 here's all our people. Here's 13 million executive orders. Good luck keeping up. And it's a genuine counter elite. It's genuine change. Let's see what it does. But it's like, so I'm just looking at that, thinking about Germany, thinking about what it's going to take for Germany, petrified by the ghost of Hitler, to allow a party to tackle this very real immigration problem, and they're just clinging on at all costs. And much like we saw in America, they didn't go lightly. They 2016 they stifled Trump, 2020 dodgy election. Only now that they finally accept it, and Silicon Valley gets on board. So I wonder if Germany will just have to go through more and more chaos and more denial until they finally get there.
Yes, they will. Unequivocally, yes, they will.
Does look that way.
Nothing that happened over this weekend will stop the other thing that happened over this weekend. So, you know, the the overlords in Germany will continue to bury their head in the sand. They'll have their feet and hands held to the fire a little bit more by the AFD, but whether that's enough or not is yet to be seen.
You know
But
what?
yes,
Feet to the fire is a good phrase. Hands to the fire. That's when you know it's like, right, we're doing
hands
hands
and
to the
feet,
fire
mate.
now, and next we're going to put other bits to the fire because this is out of control. Here's an interesting take on the stats. If only non-heterosexuals had voted in Germany, AfD would have been the top party with 28%. If
Wow.
only young non-heteros. Hang on, that's the same thing. Non-heteros. Hmm. I don't understand that. Oh, if only I don't know. Hang on, let me just check this. Gays for AFD, Germany. I don't know exactly what this is. If only young non-heteros ages 18 to 39 had voted, AFD would win on a crushing 33%.
Wow. So I
Oh,
wonder
so
what it
so if
is
only
about.
non-heterosexuals, and then if only young non-heteros. Sorry. So basically,
So two
so
groups of the same demographic.
yeah, yeah. So that's extraordinary in itself. And you can only imagine. I mean, there may be now a lot of gay people waking up and going, actually, some of the people we're letting in not too fond of gays.
Well, that will be a big part of it, and of course, like you've already said, they're led by a lesbian couple.
Yes.
So, um, we're seeing more and more of this, though, because we are told that people of a certain colour of skin should vote a certain way, people of a certain sexual persuasion should vote a certain way, and of course, it's horseshit. It doesn't it doesn't compute anymore. You can't keep telling people just based on the way they look or where they like to plant their private parts of an evening. It is it is indicative of which way they should vote.
Yeah.
Or we're all human beings, and once you see one toddler be stabbed in the name of Allah, it can make you question things.
Yes. You do wonder, with that obviously not being really a far right party in many senses, if another far right party is lurking when they don't allow AFD. But of course, presumably in Germany, such a party would just be banned choked at birth. I don't know how that even works. But if they won't allow AFD, they're going to get someone even actually far right, or they're going to get I don't
Well,
know,
this is the
or
problem,
AFD
isn't it? Because
themselves are going to become more far right. Go on.
Nazis have never gone away in Germany. There's always been at least three of them. With that if you dig deep enough, I'm sure you can find stories of Nazis actually. Nasties? Nazis. I don't know why I'm laughing at that. There's now a clip of me laughing at Nazi.
Yeah,
Nazi.
stick it
Um,
on. Stop funding hate. They finally did a
exactly.
clip of
Well,
me today on GB News.
they'll be here at some point. Let's face it, Nick. It's only a matter of time. Now that Marks and Spencers are also advertising on Dixon Cox.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. We know you
But
love Dixon Cox. You know what else would be good in your mouth? Our new, our new. What do they have like our new our new Serrano ham. It's always stuff like that at Marks. I'm trying to think what they eat at Marks and Spencer.
yeah, just delicious things, basically.
Yes,
It's more delicious things to put in your mouth.
that would be so funny if we were sponsored by Marks and Spencer. So all right, we've done quite a lot on that, and we've done about I don't
Yeah.
know 40 minutes. Should we do our other topic today, which is really an update on Ukraine and Starmer? It's not quite as clear as last week exactly what the big update is, but Starmer's going to go meet Trump. That is big news. Though it hasn't happened yet at time of recording. And one not exactly massive piece of news is that he has agreed to put up defense spending to 2.5% by 2027. It's not that massive because it was at 2.3% already, wasn't it? So it's a very sort of Starmer. I'm putting it up 0.2% by 2027, and this is very significant. It's like I think you're just doing
Oh,
that just before you meet Trump to prove. Look, Daddy, I've done what you said. I put up the defense spending. Great, this is great, Keir. We could have put it up a bit more. I mean, 2.5% by 2027. You've got Lord Dannett saying it has to be 3.5%. So
Trump
hey,
initially asked for 5%, by the way, Nick.
we want 5%. Um, I asked Barrett. We love Barrett. He said 5. I said, "Oh, it's high, but we know Barron." Sorry, I just love that Barron's deciding this. We asked Barrett.
Just looking
Um,
at Barron.
yeah,
Hey,
yeah. um, yeah, that's a classic Trump offer, isn't it? 5%. Everyone's like, "Oh, we'll do 2.5." So, but Starmer has taken this bizarre stance to me that is so bizarre because he's going to meet Trump and saying, "Oh, look, I'm doing exactly what Trump said on defense," but actually he's going completely against him on Ukraine because he's saying, well, one, he says that Russia doesn't have all the cards after Trump just said they do have all the cards, but he's also continuing to stand by Ukraine. So he said we must stand by Ukraine because if we do not achieve a lasting peace, then the economic instability are threats to our security and they will only grow. So he's saying that Russia is a threat to us. He mentioned Salisbury, cyber attacks, etc. He said Russia is a menace in our waters, like Jaws, in our airspace and on our streets. And he's put this increase in this defense spending, which, well, that means 13.4 billion more on defense every year from 2027. But just in terms of the Ukraine thing, it's so odd to me that everything Starmer says is he admits that Trump has changed the global conversation and that an end is now in sight. Right. Okay, good. But then he said we've got to increase the pressure even further on Russia. It's very, very odd. I don't understand the strategy. I mean, just as the negotiations are happening to end the war, you massively want to increase funding to Ukraine, and you want to say that the UK can basically help Ukraine on its own, which everyone knows it can't, right? You surely in any sane world. And he just tweeted 20 hours ago, in the face of war, the bond between the UK and Ukraine has only become stronger. It's so strange, the rhetoric from Starmer. This bond between Britain and Ukraine. No one knew what Ukraine was until like 10 minutes ago. We call it the Ukraine, and we maybe saw them at football. But we didn't, there's no historical
Decent.
bond.
Always had a decent
Always
team as
decent.
well.
And they've got the greatest boxer in the world right now with Usyk. But,
Well,
you
they
know,
came out of the old Slavics, didn't they? The Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. They had some great teams back in the
great teams.
70s and 80s.
But that was the extent of the average person in Britain's knowledge. We don't have some historical alliance with them. So
No.
this idea is so silly. And I'm not being anti-Ukraine. I don't want Leo to sort of jump into the podcast and start attacking me. But like, it's I just think it's bizarre Starmer's rhetoric when Trump is trying to wind this thing up. What do you make of it?
Oh, well, I wrote something. Right, the first thing I wrote down is Starmer is trying to serve two masters. Both his masters are obviously the EU on one side and the US on the other. And this can be broken down into sort of three categories. You've got the Ukraine war and this peacekeeping mission he's essentially decided that the UK would get involved in. We've got NATO and the US backstop, which is essentially any deal that Donald Trump does. Everyone in Europe is quite panicked if they don't include a US backstop in that, because that could mean that the Ukraine war ends. There's no protection from NATO and, more importantly, the US. Therefore, Russia could continue to encroach, and before you know it, you've got a Europe wide war. The third thing, of course, is this is all against the backdrop of trade and tariffs. So this serving two masters thing is becoming very intricate because he has got to appease Trump. Otherwise, Trump will place tariffs upon the UK. And there's like a £300 billion deal here. And what they're trying to do, I believe, through Mandelson, is break that down, not have just one deal where we've just got this one agreement, but a number of smaller agreements so that you don't get caught up too much in the weeds and you're able to go straight into the trade deal and start trading straight away. Because, of course, Starmer came in and promised 10 years of reshaping and growth. And then he put in Rachel Reeves, mistake one. And of course, he's fucking stupid, mistake two. And of course, and what we've seen, and then started basically internally taxing business more and making everybody who feeds into the country feel like there is no light at all at the end of the economic tunnel. And what you've got to do is pay for greener energy, which is going to be a lot more. Your wages are going to go down, and it's all the Tories' fault for something that happened fucking ages ago, because it's becoming ages ago now. It's within their gift to change it. So it's so multifaceted. First of all, I don't know what your opinion is, and we've chatted personally about this a couple of times. I was quite taken aback by Trump's stance last week, particularly in his reshaping of the rhetoric around the Ukraine, saying they started the war. Of course, I don't believe they started the war, but the more you look at it, the more you could argue that in 2014 things could have been done differently. You could argue that Boris and Ukraine could have done a deal against the Minsk, in line with the Minsk Accords. There are things that could have been done, but to say that Ukraine started the war, I think, is dubious and debatable. However, we don't know what Trump's doing here. We don't know if the outcome he's aiming for has anything to do with what he's saying now. He's essentially bringing Putin in from the cold, which arguably is a good thing to do. The danger is that he throws Ukraine and therefore Europe under the bus in doing so. I can't imagine, other than him just washing his hands of Europe and saying, I'm not dealing with this anymore, I simply can't imagine that Trump's goal is to chuck Europe under the bus. Because as soon as Europe gets into a war with Russia, he's got no choice to fund that war as well via NATO. So whether he puts a backstop in or not, it's going to be very. I don't know if this is the end of NATO or the beginning of the end of NATO, but he's still in NATO. US are still in NATO. If it all kicked off tomorrow, that they would have to. Would they? I don't know under Trump. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm thinking, well, Trump doesn't do what he has to do, does he? This could all become part of Doge. It could be NATO gone. See you later. Musk just walking in saying, "What do you do?" "Oh, I don't know. See ya." "What do you do?" I can't remember." "See ya." And all of a sudden, you've got no NATO left. So we've got this massive problem at the moment where we've got a war that's kind of going on. Trump is changing the way everybody in the world is looking at this war right now. Some people aren't going along with it at all, and they're finding this absolutely abhorrent. Even people on the right are saying, "Whoa, we don't see this." Leo Kirsch, you mentioned a couple of times, he's much more au fait on this than I am. He doesn't believe in what Trump's doing either. But like I say, it comes back to us not understanding what Trump's doing. So Starmer going out there this week is partly trying to find out what Trump's red lines are, what he's trying to do. It's also trying to make sure that he'll protect Europe and therefore the UK um, against him saying he would put troops on the ground. 2.5% of GDP, by the way, isn't going to pay for troops on the ground. So he's going to have to put that up. And then, of course, he's trying to do a trade deal, which would mean that the UK could stay solvent and fund all this shit anyway. So this is actually becoming one of the biggest post World War II conversations that the UK has had with the US, with two people that are ideologically opposed to one another. One is a very strong man, and the other is Keir Starmer. So
Yeah.
Thursday, when this is supposed to happen, Nick, is a big day for Europe and a big day for Keir Starmer, and an even bigger day for the UK.
Yeah, and we're sending in our guy Starmer. It's a bit like there's a brilliant movie called 13 Days about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they're sending in Adlai Stevenson. And this has really happened. You can watch the clip on YouTube of the actual
Yeah,
thing. They
yeah.
send him in, and they're worried that he's too liberal, and he's too old, and he's too soft. And he's like, "No, no, don't wait for the translation." And he kind of like he nails it. But Bobby Kennedy's like, "Again, he's gonna be coming out of there." But but then they're saying, "I'll leave him in," and he does it, and he's suitably tough, and then he shows them all the aerial photographs that the Cubans do have missiles in there. It just sprung into my mind thinking about Starmer going into the way you framed it. Like
Well,
we're sending in our, our best guy,
this is it. And do you know what? I'm starting to look at it thinking, Mandelson. I'm glad Mandelson's going.
right? Yeah,
And there's and that
absolute
if
slime ball,
Mandelson's
but
your
not a
hope,
complete moron.
yeah, because he's a wily old fox, isn't he?
Mm,
He's been in politics, geopolitics, since the mid '90s at least. That's now 30 years ago. So yeah, thank God for that, because Keir Starmer and woe betide Lammy. I've forgotten about lamb chops. He could be involved in this in some way. They could. This is
madness.
this is ridiculous,
It
utterly
is.
ridiculous.
Well, that's one reason this elite's failing because of just simple failure of talent. Um, but it's very interesting. The Trump rhetoric. There was even a clip where he refused to call Putin a dictator after he already called Zelensky a dictator. They said, "Would you call Putin the same?" He goes, I don't use those terms lightly. I think we'll see." And he starts going, "We're going to get a great deal." So he's really going far in this flattery of Putin. I mean, and it's smart because, of course, Putin can walk away from the table at any time. He can do what he wants. Trump knows this. So he's going for total flattery to Putin, won't even call Putin a dictator, won't criticize him in any way. Whereas basically openly hates Zelensky. And I can't tell where the line is between tactic and just does hate him. Apparently, he just pissed off Vance and Kellogg and everyone. He's just been rude to them all, apparently. And he's just ungrateful. Even Biden, apparently, Biden even swore at him on the phone, I heard, because he was so ungrateful about their funding. Zelensky might just be a dick, aside from whether you think Zelensky's like installed, whether you think he's doing a good job, whether you think he's an idiot. He might just be a dick. I mean, he doesn't come across as particularly likable, does he? So that could be part of it. But then you've got
He,
the rhetoric of Trump playing 5D chess, flattering Putin to bring him to the table, forcing Zelensky to the table with different tactics, and then he'll change it up on them when they're actually there, presumably.
yeah, Klitschko. I forget Klitschko, Mayor of Kiev, one of the famous
Well, yeah,
Klitschko
both
brothers.
Klitschko's dominated boxing for a long time.
Yeah, great fighters, tough men,
Tough.
man mountains. And he's the mayor of Kiev, and he's basically, when Kiev was under attack a year or two ago, he was leading that. Zelensky hasn't seen. It's difficult because what Trump does when he talks like this, he does because you have to counter it, right? I stand by what I tweeted last week, that Trump's rhetoric around Zelensky and Ukraine made me feel very uncomfortable. And I did it in a way which opened up the question. And people that are very vehemently opposed to continuing funding the war, actually already opposed to the Ukraine and Zelensky, were all straight in on me. What you don't understand is, lots of unhelpful things like you need to read more. I read a fuckload, right? But that doesn't help. I'm not just going to go away and read and guess what it is I should read. So, but there were people in there that were quite helpful and pointed things
Do
out.
not
And it
force
does,
Paul to read. That is no,
yeah,
mate. Don't be forcing
yeah.
me to read.
Matt, I am reading so many self-help books. I have not got time to to get engaged in war books, or the Ukraine or geopolitics. And anyway, I rely on the news cycle. I'm in that. Now, of course, there is the counter to this is we've been told a false narrative with regards to Ukraine and Zelensky. And I always thought it was kind of weird, right back at the beginning of the war, particularly in 22 or whenever it was, that we just wholesale bought that Ukraine was who we must stand by. Because as soon as that happens, and the type of people that say that, I start questioning it. But not questioning it in the sense that I don't understand the NATO problem. I don't understand the encroachment on Russia. And I don't understand what that could mean actually for Europe on the other side. Of course, I'm acutely aware of all that sort of stuff. And a massive world war in Europe is not ideal. In fact, I would much rather it didn't. I'm 45, so now I'm getting to the point where perhaps I wouldn't be sent, but we're getting pretty fucking desperate. So I might go. Nick, you've got a better chance of going. I mean,
Well, I mean,
and then it's like,
I do a lot more personal training than you. You've been losing weight, but you'll be starting to like, oh
yeah,
shit, I better put the
weak.
weight back on.
Yeah, yeah, I'd have to. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to fight. I really don't want to fight. I'm more of a lover than a fighter.
We both got
If there's
dodgy
any love,
eyesight, and I
yeah,
get feet
yeah, I can't
pain.
see anything. I
Yeah,
can't
hopefully
see
we.
anything.
I mean, we
I'm
could you could put
prone.
us in a different role. I mean, Vance went over, to get his military experience, but he was a journalist and I think photographer with the Marines. So for 6 months in Iraq, so we could do something like that. I mean, maybe
Yeah, we could get. I mean, we could podcast about it from a safe
podcast. Yeah,
distance.
from the front. We're here on the front line. Just like those guys who pretend to be more like. "Whew, whew." Nick, why are you doing that noise with your mouth just out of shot? Whew.
neither of us. Neither
We're
of us are
here
Kate
with big
Aidy.
headphones on the front lines. Paul, what do you think about cheese? It's just like a ridiculous. We're just there doing our usual banter. What's Ed Davey been up to, Paul? And we're on the front line. Um, some of that is genuine. Some of it you always feel is a bit hammed up. Why is Douglas Murray
Yeah,
always wearing a flak jacket? Douglas, you're in Kensington. Why are you wearing a flak jacket?
yeah,
Um,
exactly. But there were greats, weren't there? Kate Aidy, John
yes, no,
Simpson,
it can
people
be
like
very
that.
dangerous. Um,
Um,
we
a
wouldn't do
few
the
people.
dangerous one though. We'd do the fake
No,
dangerous one with a green screen. Um,
no.
yeah, but it could kick off making light of it because it's horrific. I mean, one thing is,
I,
all our establishments seem to want it. That's the really scary thing. There's
yeah.
endless articles. We must go to war. Why is Trump backing out? Like suddenly, quite like someone like Douglas Murray, who you'd see as quite pro-Trump, though he also historically has been known as a neocon. So it perhaps shouldn't be surprising that he's spoiling for war. But he's just written this very kind of like, no, we need to support Ukraine. Here are all my reasons, kind of. And they even go quite anti-Trump now. They're prepared to say anything. That we know Boris has been absurdly pro the war. He even scuppered a deal allegedly. So it's like, why are you guys obsessed with this war? Maybe
See,
this is what we think our new identity is in Europe and a way of asserting ourselves. Because there are elements of the right that have said, look, if America does become more isolationist, this is good for Europe because we can make our own destiny. And there's there are elements where the left and right come together, which is this idea that we're in the American empire, and it's actually not been great for us to be so subservient to America and for them to imbue our culture so thoroughly. So there is an argument that says, okay, an isolationist America is better for us if we can find our own way. There's another argument that says that America will get drawn back in and it will be like World War II. And that's certainly what our establishment is absolutely desperate for.
well, what's evidentially true, and what was the premise for a lot of this stuff initially, is that Ukraine fighting the war with Russia is a lot cheaper than the rest of Europe fighting with Russia. And that hasn't changed. So there is a certain element of convenience about this, that Ukraine fighting that war and distracting Russia and keeping them where they are, keeping them preoccupied with getting the old USSR back together, is stopping a wider war in Europe. The question still remains, would there be a wider European war if the Ukraine hadn't in some way encroached upon or NATO hadn't encroached upon Russia by supporting Ukraine or suggesting Ukraine could join NATO, which is still a massive issue and would be a massive red line for Putin, as we already know. And essentially, Trump's ruling that out. And I think
And Starmer still
most,
wants NATO membership. He still keeps going on about NATO membership, even now on the cusp
which is where it
of
goes mental
negotiation.
for me. So uncomfortable with Trump, still relatively supportive of the Ukraine, never really been that supportive of Ukraine during NATO, during joining NATO, sorry, on the basis that we already have a ring around. It's unfortunate for Ukraine that they're not involved in it, but there's very good geographical and political reasons and World War II related reasons why they're not. So we have to accept along the way that Europe and the US as a combination through NATO have overstepped the mark. Russia have, their own sovereignty to take care of. So, accepting of all of that, what I still believe we can't do is entirely capitulate so that Putin gets everything. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that's what Trump is after. I'm quite happy to accept your point of view on this, which is there is the art of the deal and a negotiation going on. If you watch the latest Jonathan Pye video on this, you can see the total opposite catastrophization of the reaction to Donald Trump manifest because he is convinced that essentially what Trump is doing is entirely capitulating. What he's doing is the one thing he would advise everybody else not to do, and that is to take Donald Trump literally on his word. Every word he says, you must believe. That's the basis of the sketch. Because if you don't believe that, then none of it's true anyway. We don't know what Donald Trump is doing, and we don't know what Donald Trump is thinking, which of course is part of the fear because we lack the control as a result. But I'm happy to accept that what Trump is doing is way outside of my grasp of the situation. What I can't see being an outcome is that Putin gets absolutely everything. I can see him getting the Donbass region and keeping Crimea. Now, there are a lot of people who perhaps listening and watching this would say, Paul, that's fucking mental. You can't do that. He stole it from them. However, I can see that happening. And then there may be being a new border, but I can't see Putin getting absolutely everything. Because if he's just carte blanche given everything he asks for, then he will continue his journey. And why wouldn't he? He's a man in his mid 70s now. His whole raison d'etre, Nick, is to recreate in some way the USSR, which was lost within his lifetime. And he would love to do that. So I don't know where it ends. What I am worried about is if that negotiation of where it starts and ends lays with Keir Starmer. Because Keir Starmer
Well, it won't, so
is an idiot.
we don't have to worry about that. I mean, it. Yeah, I mean, Putin. Look, I'm no expert. He'll probably get the. Surely he'll get the four oblasts, and as you say, basically the Donbass region. He'll surely get some guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO for 25 years or maybe ever. I mean, presumably, maybe it has to be ever now. And basically, he gets what he wants, right? He gets his bit of territory. He gets an assurance over NATO, and probably just basically wins. But it is sometimes I think all the rhetoric. Maybe it is about actually getting us into World War III. Maybe it's about saving face because Putin's basically won. And I said this last week, and I try and be dispassionate about it. And of course, I'm no expert. Someone could come and say no, he hasn't. But obviously, he's gone through. Obviously, it's been harder for him, and he's lost all these men and all that kind of thing. But I mean, in terms of ultimately coming out of it with what you want, in that sense, yes, maybe it's been harder for him, and he's lost more than he thought. But ultimately, he'd be pretty happy with the outcome, I would imagine. But hey, I could be wrong.
We're also assuming that Putin thinks that Putin believes Trump. Probably the wiliest of foxes in all of this negotiation is Vladimir Putin, because he's the one person who has entire control of his country. Donald Trump does have a massive mandate, but he doesn't have complete control of his country. Donald Trump doesn't have complete control of Europe. Putin does, and he's not stupid in any way. We fundamentally, I don't know if you do, fundamentally disagree with the way he goes about things. and he's a dictator, I'm happy to accept that. There's no problem in that. The jury's out for me on whether Zelensky's a dictator. I don't know enough about the internal politics. Where did the money go? Great question. I've not been able to answer it. 3 trillion quid. Of course, Leo would tell us it's not 3 trillion quid in cash. It might be. It could be the best part of 1 trillion quid in cash, though, where the other two are just stock and parts and bombs and stuff. But there's a lot of brinkmanship going on here, and I have run out of qualifications to answer the questions, Nick.
Same, and let's see what happens in negotiation on Thursday. And I've also run out of qualifications. I mean, my expert area is straight white male comedians not getting gigs and the discrimination therein. But I've moved on. I've moved on from that. But there are things I really know about and I'm really passionate about. And there's things why I defer to the not the experts because they might be the wrong experts, but I defer to a variety of voices. But let's see. We've done an hour, Paul. I think that's enough for the old three people. We'll be
Yeah.
back with interviews soon. So all the people complaining that I don't do those, they'll be back. And everything is available on nickdixon.net. You get the full version of this podcast. You get our extra whole bonus podcast that we're doing. All my articles, my interviews with all these people who you might like. Carl Benjamin, Nima, Lord Frost, whoever. I'm going to be doing loads more coming up as well on nickdixon.net. So go there for everything. Paul is at Paul Cox Comedy. Anywhere else you want to send them, Paul?
No, Paul Cox comedy everywhere, particularly YouTube. Substack I started just last week. It's got 17 subscribers. If that got to 20 by the next episode, that would be great.
Stay
But
humble.
YouTube, brilliant. I'm gonna be making as much. In fact, someone wrote to me on YouTube just today and went, "Love the stuff, but where's Dix?" And I just had to say, by the way, some of the stuff is just Cox.
It won't have dicks, yeah. Some of it will be without dicks. You're like, you've transitioned, you've got rid of the dicks.
There's plenty of Dix and Cox to go round,
Right.
but occasionally we will operate alone.
Yes. Dicks and cocks can operate independently. I don't even know what I'm
Can.
saying anymore. These words are all it's like merged together in my mind. Like, well, I kind of keep track of my own puns that I've lost in a world of dicks and cocks, which is not where I want to be. If I'm going to be lost in a world, let's make it one of vaginas and breast. Okay, I'm a heterosexual man technically. Yes, I don't like women, but that's a whole separate issue. As we started the podcast with, Nick's going to be alone forever. But actually, do you know what? You know what's funny about that is if you ask some of the women at work, not all, but some, they would actually say Nick is actually the most supportive because you see, you get these people. I hate these women. You got these people, don't you? Going on about women's rights and stuff, but actually not very nice to women in person. I'm
Yeah.
the exact opposite. Go on,
Is
I
that
play a
is that
misogynist on screen, but actually I'm listening to women at work and going, oh yeah, and relating and coming up with ideas. I'm just a great guy, Paul, but I play a
I'm just
villain on screen sometimes.
I'm just wondering if the woman you're referring to is the Spanish lady who doesn't speak any English, who goes around cleaning up late at night.
She's
Whether
nice. I
you
say
believe you've had
hola.
a conversation with her.
I say
Yeah, I say
hola.
hello to her. Lewis Schaefer says all sorts of words to her. I don't know what they mean. I get quite embarrassed because
They're
Lewis
all
is
about
unhinged.
him and his problems and his
Yeah,
diet.
he pretends to speak Spanish. He points a lot in the nether regions and he beckons towards a quiet room, and it's all a bit awkward. I walk away at that point. She seems like she can handle herself.
That's disturbing and very on brand for Lewis. All right. Thanks to the audio and YouTube people very much. We'll see everyone else on nickdixon.net. But for all the YouTube and audio people, we'll see you again next week.